Look, I know we're only heading into week 3. It's really early to make this statement, but I don't care. The Louisville Cardinals are one of the top 3 teams in the ACC this season. We'll explain why on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on, everyone? Welcome into this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. This episode of the show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Go to 5hourenergy.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off of your order. Look, I know it's still early. We're only heading into week 3 of the college football season, but I've seen enough so far to confirm or justify my preseason take, and that is that Louisville is one of the top 3 teams in the ACC. It's been a weird year so far already for the conference. We'll break it down. We'll also give you some week 2 takeaways. California upsetting Auburn on the road. Some key ACC conference matchups in week 2 that we'll discuss. And then to conclude the show, we'll dive into a Monday mailbag segment. So a lot of good stuff on the docket for discussion on this fine Monday. I don't know about you all, but whenever the weather just cools down a little bit and we get into that, premium elite fall weather, it's so good for the vibes. Like my Los Angeles Chargers started the Jim Harbaugh era yesterday with a win. So I'm feeling good, and obviously feeling good about how Louisville played this past weekend. 49-14 victory over Jacksonville State. They will now head into a weird week 3 bye where they will sort of rest up, get healthy, and prepare for Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech will be the first opponent for the Cardinals coming up in the ACC on the week 4 docket. That will be on September 21st. But nonetheless, like I mentioned, this has been such a weird season already for the conference. Teams that should have been good have stumbled. Teams that were sort of being overlooked have risen to the occasion. But I know it's early when I say this. However, I've already been thinking this. This was my preseason take, and what I've seen from the first couple of weeks within the conference is that it's pure chaos, which helps the Cardinals. Louisville is a top 3 team in the ACC. And there's 2 parts to this discussion. Number 1, you have to believe in Louisville. And I do. Unfortunately, not really much can be taken away from the first 2 games that Jeff Brohm's team has played, other than that they handle business, which not only some teams in the conference, but ranked teams across the country can't say the same. Like, this has been a weird year for parity outside of like Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas. Like, this has been like upset alert almost every week. Like, don't overlook an unranked team if you're a ranked team playing at home. So part of this discussion is me believing in Brohm's team in year 2. Like, I believe in the offense. I think that Louisville has essentially been on autopilot in these first 2 games to the point to where they really haven't had to open the playbook up. They haven't had to tip their hand. They've basically been in cruise control, allowing the severe talent advantage and the size advantage in the trenches to help them win games and win them rather easily. 62-0 against Austin Peay, 49-14 against Jacksonville State. So I believe in the offense. The defense, also something that I didn't really realize, that Ashton Gillotte hasn't played as much as I thought he would. It feels like Louisville's sort of resting him up and using him when they need to, but he hasn't played as much as I honestly thought he was going to. And he is going to. Let's go ahead and put that out there. But I do like that you're sort of giving your stars some rest and getting them fresh for the meat of the schedule that comes up here in the next couple weeks. So for starters, you can't have Louisville as a top 3 team unless you believe in them. And it was clear that in the offseason, not many did. Like, I know that the Cardinals were sort of a trendy selection to get back to Charlotte once again, but the preseason rankings that I saw just really didn't it didn't represent that line of thinking. The ACC preseason poll, Louisville was ranked at 5th, and they didn't receive one first place vote. The top 4 teams did. Virginia Tech at number 6 did. Georgia Tech at number 9 did. Cal at number 10 did. And Boston College at number 14 did. But Louisville at number 5 did not receive a first place vote. I thought that was pretty interesting. And that was sort of one of the higher placements that I've seen them on those lists. I saw them anywhere from 7, 8, even in the double digits. I'd have to go back and find those publications. But the preseason hype surrounding Louisville was very polarizingly opposite, depending on who you talk to. But I always believed in this Louisville team. I said it multiple times that I felt like the only position that Louisville didn't for sure get better in was the running back position. And we've seen that they have a very serviceable group in the backfield. The second part of this statement is that I mentioned that there's been chaos in this conference. And that it helps Louisville because Louisville hasn't had to deal with it. Now, look, I know that some will say, why are you proclaiming Louisville as a top 3 team on week 3 when Louisville has played 2 mid-major or FCS opponents? It's the belief in Louisville to begin with. It's the fact that this conference is utter chaos to the point to where I think Louisville is just sitting there looking down like, wow, hopefully we don't get thrown into that. And that is the case. We'll see right away when they play Georgia Tech. So, I mean, you see Florida State. Florida State is 0-2 with 2 conference losses. They were the number 1 projected team in the conference with 81 first place votes. Now it seems like they're on almost an impossible path to get to the ACC championship game. Clemson right now 1-1. Still verdict is out on Dabo Swinney's team. They got beat to Georgia pretty handedly, but they bounced back against Appalachian State. Miami looks the part. NC State, that's a weird team right now. They didn't look convincing against Western Carolina, and they got absolutely destroyed against Tennessee, which unfortunately that's the case. I think Tennessee is one of the top 5 teams in the country myself. SMU hasn't looked convincing. Virginia Tech lost at Vanderbilt. North Carolina lost their quarterback for the remainder of the season. Georgia Tech lost to Syracuse. Syracuse has played better. Boston College has played better. Wake Forest and Virginia might be a little bit better than advertised. And then California, like I mentioned, upset Auburn. So where is Louisville in the tier list right now? Well, the top 3 tiers, I think, contain right around 10 teams, I would say. The top 3 tiers for me at this point in time, the first tier is Miami. I think Miami is clear-cut the best team. I know Florida's not the greatest opponent, but they did go into the swamp and win 41-17. So with them doing what they did this past week as well, they won 56-9 over Florida A&M. I know not much to tell there, but I do think that this Miami team is the best team in the ACC. And then you get to tier 2, and there's 2 teams on tier 2. Louisville is one of those teams. It's sort of a 2A, 2B situation. The other team with Louisville on this tier list is Clemson. Now, I know some will say, really? Why are the Tigers right there? They got beat by Georgia by 31 points. Georgia's the buzzsaw. That is the best team in the country. And I know that some will use that sort of as a guideline as a means to place Clemson somewhere, but 34-3, Georgia's going to have a lot of games where they allow less than 10 points. That is a phenomenal defense. The offense is really good. I know Tennessee Tech isn't the greatest opponent either, but they allowed 3 points again. They'll play Kentucky and allow less than 10 points once again. Georgia is by and far at this point the best team in the country. So with them bouncing back against Appalachian State, I do think Clemson, if Klubnik is able to play like he did against the Mountaineers, I think they're a top 3 team in this conference, and the defense sort of keeps them in that conversation. Outside of that, you have 7 teams that all fit in Tier 3. And Tier 3 literally should be named TBD because the verdict is still out on these teams. We're still waiting to see. In those 7 teams, you have Boston College, who is 2-0 now. Virginia Tech bounced back after the loss against Vanderbilt. I do believe in Kyron Drones. California is 2-0. We'll see if they can continue their good play. Georgia Tech, 2-1. They beat Florida State. They lost to Syracuse, and then Syracuse on this list because they are 2-0. And then NC State. Look, I know that they haven't really been all that great to start the year. Western Carolina wasn't a great showing. Tennessee, they got dominated. But I do think that the pieces are there for this NC State team to be good. So for the time being, they are right here in the smack dab middle of Tier 3. Now, Florida State is on the outside looking in because they are 0-2 in conference play. SMU is right on the outside as well. Pittsburgh, 2. Duke as well. Virginia. Virginia was probably the largest snub for me on Tier 3, but there's a lot of chaos. Ultimately, I feel as if Louisville is a top 3 team in the conference. But let's break down what happened in week 2. Like I mentioned, California putting the rest of the country on watch. We'll tell you what happened, talk about the week 3 matchups that you need to be watching for as it relates to Louisville in the conference, coming up on the next segment of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Grab a 5-Hour Energy shot to stay alert to watch all of your favorite games, or if you stayed up late to see that intense overtime game between the Lions and the Rams, you need to take a 5-Hour Energy shot in the morning so you can start your day. 5-Hour Energy is the brand hardworking people like you have trusted for over 20 years to give them the alert, energized feeling they need to get through a busy, hectic day. You can always know where to find the 5-Hour Energy shots, right at the cash register at nearly every convenience, drug, and grocery store nationwide. Stock up on money-saving multi-packs to make sure you never run out of delicious, energizing 5-Hour Energy shots. Go to 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5, followed by ourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy product today. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. Again, this offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is also not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Cardinal fans, thanks again for tuning in to this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast, and thanks for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free and available on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. I mentioned on yesterday's episode that there's going to start being a question of the day. Honestly, if I would have thought about it beforehand, we're going to put it in the first segment moving forward. But question of the day, drop your answer in the YouTube comment below, or be sure to reply to the episode tweet on Twitter or X, whatever you call it. Question of the day, outside of Miami, which team do you feel like is the largest competition for Louisville to get to the ACC championship game? Be sure to drop your answer in the comments heading into, or drop the answer in the comments after you listen to the question. But takeaways from week 2 of the ACC college football season. The first one is California, maybe the largest sleeper in the conference right now. Now, I understand that it was the early part of the season, but they went to Auburn and got the win at Jordan-Hare Stadium. That's not an easy thing to do. And I was impressed by, Fernando Mendoza, how well he played. Javion Thomas is averaging, or he had, I think it was a touchdown in this game, if I'm not mistaken. But I didn't really catch much of this game. Yeah, Javion Thomas had a touchdown. It was really awesome to see California sort of welcome to the ACC moment, right? So that's sort of the main takeaway there, is that they had the biggest win of the week. Duke went to Northwestern and got a win in overtime. Really wasn't all that great of a game. NC State played perhaps one of the best teams in the country, and they got demolished. You had some inter-ACC games. You look at Georgia Tech and Syracuse. Syracuse opened up a big lead. Georgia Tech's comeback fell just short, and that was a really rough result for the Georgia Tech crowd, which I thought Georgia Tech was a lot better than that. Virginia went to Winston-Salem, 31-30 victory over Wake Forest. That was an interesting game because I feel like both of the teams are sort of bottom of the conference, but they battled there. North Carolina bounced back. Boston College shut out Duquesne 56-0. Pittsburgh came back down 27-6 and ended up winning 28-27 over Scott Satterfield's team. Once again, Scott Satterfield's team not able to hold a lead. No issue there. BYU defeating SMU at home. Once again, sort of emphasizing that SMU might be more of a pretender than a contender. So ultimately, not really much of glaring takeaways. It was nice to see two ACC games. Syracuse was probably, I'd say Syracuse and California were the two biggest risers of the power rankings for me this week. The two largest fallers would be SMU in this situation. And also, I kind of went back and forth here, but I'm going to go with NC State. Stanford also got the first win of their season. So the three matchups to watch for the closest as it relates to having some relevance in the ACC in conference play. The first one is not a conference matchup, but it will really tell you how good this team is. I know Boston College beating Florida State. People thought it was really notable. It turns out Florida State probably isn't all that great, right? Well, they're going to be tested extremely this week. They'll go on the road to Columbia to play a top 6 Missouri team on the road. So we'll learn a lot about Boston College at 12:45 on Saturday as to whether or not this Bill O'Brien year one team is legit. Now, if they lose by a considerable margin to Missouri, it's not really going to tell you too much, but it still will show you, like, if Boston College competes in this game, maybe we need to have a conversation about what the Eagles are going to do year one. But right now, I think that that's the number one matchup that you need to focus on here, focusing on ACC play. The second matchup is Memphis at Florida State. The Tigers are 2-0. They beat North Alabama and Troy, but they really haven't been tested. Florida State, I really because I'm not a huge fan of Florida State, admittedly, it would be kind of funny to watch this happen. But for the conference, I don't want to even think about what would be the topic of discussion if Mike Norvell's team opens up the season 0-3. 0-2 is already bad enough. You had a weird bye week between the second and third game for Florida State. It happened this year because they started the season a week earlier than everyone else. But they need to beat Memphis. It's another out-of-conference game, but they need to beat Memphis just to kind of get things on the right track. So if Florida State struggles again, dare I say, if they lose this game, then, the discussion will be absolutely brutal moving forward. The third matchup to watch for, sort of a mixed bag here, because you could go in a couple different directions. Not really any premier opportunities here, but I'm going to go with Virginia getting that third matchup. I think Virginia's still on the outside looking in, but they've handled business. They went on the road to beat Wake Forest. They beat Richmond by 21. They'll host a Maryland team that was favored by almost 10 points to beat Michigan State. They end up losing 27-24. But Virginia will step into this matchup 2-0. And if they're able to get to 3-0, maybe Virginia is another team that is a little bit better than we thought they were going to be. And the Cardinals will play at Virginia this season, so this is definitely relevant information. So mainly week 2 takeaways: California, Syracuse, the biggest winners; NC State, Georgia Tech, and others, the largest losers. To conclude the show, we will dive into a Monday mailbag segment where you all have asked a lot of key questions that I want to get into and answer. So we'll do that coming up on the next segment of Locked On Louisville. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Ibotta. If you're thinking about taking that dream vacation next spring, next summer, but you're dreading the cost, you need to utilize Ibotta. You can get cash back on all your purchases so you can spend more time making memories next spring and summer and less time dreaming about them. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. You can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play and download the free Ibotta app to start using cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's all one word. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use the code LOCKEDONCollege. Already into the final segment of this Monday edition of the show. The Louisville Cardinals on a bye this week. So the topics will be a little bit different. We'll have some basketball recruiting that we'll talk about. We might dive into some other topics. We might have another guest on the show. Who knows? I'm not for certain if we're going to plan for Georgia Tech this week or if we're just going to wait to next week. But Louisville is on a bye. So just want to give a heads up on scheduling moving forward. But some great questions to answer for the show. One of the questions asked by a friend of the show, consistent listener and everydayer, if you will, Christian Fernandez. He asks, how do you feel about this team heading into the bye week before we begin conference play? Do you overall think the first bye week of the season came at a perfect time for us? Thanks, Christian, for tuning in always and dropping this question in the YouTube comments. I feel as good as you could. No significant injuries outside of maybe Don Chaney Jr.'s high ankle sprain that we're going to sort of wait to hear about if that's going to be a large effect or if he's going to miss an extended period of time. You feel about as good as you could. 2 wins that you covered the spread on. I don't know that it came at the perfect time. Like I think that you have 2 bye weeks, so I guess so. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong time, but getting another week to prepare for Georgia Tech is something you could view as beneficial. So yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm okay with it. So, but thank you for the question. Another question that was asked about the football team was more so surrounding the offensive side of the ball. At this point, Chris Bell hasn't really broken onto the scene yet this season. I know you said that you aren't concerned about him after week 1. Do you think after week 2 that there's any room for concern? Not really. Again, Louisville's primary goal on Saturday was to run the football, and they did that with ease. So not really much you can take away from this performance. He caught 3 passes for 61 yards and a touchdown. The touchdown came on that 48-yard catch, and I'm okay with it. He was second on the team in receiving. Ja'Cory Brooks had 6 for 89. I'm all right with it. No true worries for me when Louisville starts to air the ball out more. If he's putting up performances where he's not getting a catch, or he's getting under 20 yards receiving it for a consistent stretch of games, then we have a conversation. But at this point, no, I'm not really worried. So defensively, Ashton Gillotte hasn't done much these past 2 weeks. Are we misled to believe that he's going to take a step back in production? Well, if you remember last year, Gillotte really didn't get going until a couple games in, right? At this point, he's got 7 tackles, 1 sack. And I mentioned earlier in the show that Louisville hasn't really played him as much as I thought they would. So that plays into consideration. The pressures are there. The sack numbers just aren't there yet. Again, way too early to really call it one way or the other. But, I mean, he's going to have a fantastic season. Believe that. Louisville hasn't gotten a basketball commitment yet in the 2025 class. Do we feel like Louisville's going to hit the portal harder and high school recruiting will take a back seat, or what will the splits look like in terms of scholarship distribution? Good question. It is going to be close to the time that Louisville does get a high school recruit. I think that you're probably going to see a 3 to 4 man class. You have some grad transfers this year. I ultimately think in terms of additions, it'll probably be, I think you can have up to 3 guys returning, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe more than that. 4 guys returning. I think it's actually up to 5 guys returning, actually. I think in terms of additions, it's probably going to be split down the middle this cycle. 3 to 4 high school guys, maybe 1 more transfer portal guy than that. So it really, truly all just depends on who Louisville is able to get to commit in the high school ranks. But right now, it is to the time to where you're going to start to see Louisville try to push for some commitments. So really wait and see. I feel like a broken record here just saying wait and see, wait and see, wait and see, but it's the truth at this point in time. So next question. Sorry, I was sitting there trying to see which ones I answered, which ones I didn't answer. Any worry about Tyler Shuck that you didn't have in the first, or that you didn't have in the preseason? I imagine the question is asking, after watching Tyler Shuck in the first 2 games, do I have any additional new concerns? Not really. Main one was staying healthy. Knock on wood. He's been able to do that in the first 2 games. He's looked comfortable. Like, yeah, he missed some open reads in the first couple of weeks, but nobody's going to be perfect. He's made some really good throws. He hasn't taken too many risks. He's taken what the defense has given him and just gone out there and put together really good performances to win games. So he was great in the first game. He was good in the second game. So no, I think more so some of maybe my concerns early on was like, how comfortable is he going to look in this offense? They've actually been sort of taken away. So I feel okay about Tyler Shuck moving forward. He's going to be playing better competition, obviously, but that's just to be expected. So final question until we get out of here. Do we think at the end of the day that Louisville for sure is going to win more than 9 games? I had them at 10-2, so I think that they're going to win more than 9 games. Notre Dame obviously lost to Northern Illinois. Miami looks really good. Boston College looks better than expected. That's going to be a true road game on a Friday night. Clemson is sort of hit or miss. Kentucky doesn't really look all that great. I do think that they're going to win more than 9 games. So I'm going to go ahead and say that on record that Louisville will win at least 9 games. More than 9 games get a little bit tougher, but I think they're going to win 10. So the answer would be yes. So that is going to wrap up today's episode of the show. We'll be right back here tomorrow. Potential basketball recruiting, some potential football talk. We'll break it down coming up on the next segment, next episode of Locked On Louisville. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here really soon. Go Cards.